no doubt a face familiar to many folks in the audience today. If you are not familiar with this gentleman, this is General Dan Sickles. I did think of asking folks for words that popped into mind when I said Sickles' name, but I thought, well, that could kind of get unruly here, so. Your laughter proves my point. And that is that he is a general that lots of people have varying opinions of. Some good, some bad. He is the most hotly debated general officer of the Battle of Gettysburg, I would say. In many different ways, the Battle of Chancellorsville influenced how the Battle of Gettysburg was fought, especially if we think about how Robert E. Lee is formulating his battle plan here on July 2nd. But I mention all of this because what happened at Chancellorsville is going to shadow over what happens here at Gettysburg for Dan Sickles and influence his decisions here on the afternoon of July 2nd. Now, at the end of the first day of this battle, some 16,000 or so casualties had already fallen in combat. Union forces had been driven back through the town of Gettysburg. They took position on high ground just south of it. Looking north here, we can see Cemetery Hill due north of our position and Cemetery Ridge stretching along there. From where I'm standing out in this direction as well, you can also see Culp's Hill and the observation tower peeking out through the trees there. Well, at the very start of the day on July 2nd, the bottom end of the Union battle line, this famous Union fishhook, was held by General John Geary's division of the Union 12th Corps. To his right were Sickles' men encamped just west of the Taneytown Road, and to his right, Major General Winfield Hancock's 2nd Corps. At about 5 a.m. on July 2nd, George Meade issued orders telling General Geary to pull his 12th Corps Division from Cemetery Ridge and to send them over towards Culp's Hill. Well, in order to occupy this gap now on the left side of the Union line, orders were sent to General Dan Sickles telling him to move his position, move his command, and occupy the place that General Geary's division had just held. Now, here's a problem for Dan Sickles right off the bat. Geary's division never actually had a battle line on the left end of the Union line. They were camped just north of Little Round Top, which we can see Little Round Top through the trees over in this direction. They were just camped north of there. They were bivouacked. But they didn't actually have a battle line or a formal position, according to Sickles. So he is confused from the get-go over where exactly his corps is going to be located. Sickles' confusion starts hours before his fabled and fateful move out here towards the peach orchard. It starts at the break of dawn on July 2nd. This debate over where exactly his corps is supposed to be located. Now, about 7 a.m., General Meade sent his son, Captain Meade, to make contact with Dan Sickles and basically make sure that Sickles and the 3rd Army Corps were where he wanted them to be. He said, George, you just ride down to General Sickles, explain him where my headquarters are, and ask if his troops are in position yet and what he has to report. So Captain Meade goes riding down Cemetery Ridge. Meade's headquarters, of course, just up below Cemetery Hill itself at the Leicester House. Captain Meade goes riding down to find General Sickles, and he comes across the 3rd Corps camp. He doesn't even get to speak to Sickles at this moment because Sickles is still in his tent. He speaks to a captain on the 3rd Corps staff who informs him that Sickles is confused over where exactly the 3rd Army Corps is supposed to be located. Now, Captain Meade is a little confused himself at this point. He was not expecting to hear this upon reaching the 3rd Corps camp. So he decides he's going to ride back and talk to his father and try to straighten all this out. And by the way, his father, Captain George Gordon Meade, remember, this is only his 4th day in command. Oh, excuse me. He'd only taken command of the Army just a few days before the Battle of Gettysburg. So now Captain Meade returns back to George Meade's headquarters just south of Cemetery Hill. He tells him what he has learned at the 3rd Corps camp. George Meade is not very happy to hear about this report from Dan Sickles. One observer said that Meade snapped at him in a quick, sharp way when annoyed, and he said this, that Sickles, quote, is to go into position on the left of the 2nd Corps, that his right is to rest on General Hancock's left, and that he is to occupy the general line held by Geary the night before, and also to say to him that it is of the utmost importance that his troops should be in position as soon as possible. So now poor old Captain Meade, George Meade's son, has to ride back down to Sickles and convey this message to him, telling him, you know, you better move into position pretty soon here. The commander of the army is getting upset with you. You better move into your position and be where we want you to be, just north of Little Round Top on Cemetery Ridge off in this direction. You can see the Trossel Farm just to the right there, those the ridgeline Cemetery Ridge, the trees. That's more or less where they're ordering Sickles to take his position. So this all happens about 7 o'clock or so in the morning. And for now, it would seem that matters are settled for the 3rd Army Corps. Well, several hours later, the situation changes again for General Sickles and his Army Corps. About 11 o'clock, Sickles rides up to Meade's headquarters himself to say that he is still unsure of where exactly he is supposed to be. This has been going on for several hours now. Sickles is still unsure of where he's supposed to be. And the best way I can think to describe this is these are two men who just really aren't on the same page at all. Meade and Sickles did not get along very well. On June 30th, Meade sent Sickles a message chastising him for his Army Corps' slow movements and marching. So these are two men who don't get along. They're not on the same page here. And I think deep down, Sickles has this feeling that something's wrong, and he doesn't want to be this annoying guy who keeps bringing up this problem over and over again. But he is commanding a Union Army Corps here at Gettysburg. He wants to make sure that he is where he's supposed to be. So he has to keep asking over and over, hey, is this where I'm supposed to be at? Remember, Geary's division was not in a line of battle. So he can't exactly take up where Geary's position was. They were only camped out along Cemetery Ridge. Now for Dan Sickles, all of this confusion is not just due to the fact that he doesn't know exactly where Geary's position was camped. It is also due to the terrain as well around his position, notably where we are standing right here, out along the Emmitsburg Road on this blazing hot afternoon here at the Peach Orchard. We are about 60 feet higher in elevation from where Sickles was ordered to be down on Cemetery Ridge. And as Sickles looks out in this area, he sees higher ground, and he instantly begins to worry and fear that this is another Hazel Grove situation. That if the Confederates can place artillery up here on this ridge line, they will be able to command his own line and bombard them, and that's not a situation that Sickles wants to relive here. So his concern is not only where is he supposed to be on Cemetery Ridge, but is that even the best position for his Army Corps? When Hunt rides out with Sickles to survey the ground, Sickles brings this to his attention, this high ground out here along the Emmitsburg Road, asking whether or not this is a better position for the 3rd Corps to take up. Hunt, on the whole, agrees that this is a better position for the 3rd Corps simply because it is higher ground. Strategically, this road helps to cover the left flank of the Union Army, and this occupation of this spot here out along the Emmitsburg Road at the Peach Orchard could help to perhaps prevent the Confederates from outflanking the Federal line. Henry Tremaine, a staff officer on the 3rd Army Corps, believed that the men, quote, would be at the mercy of the occupants of the high ground at the rear of the extreme left, as well as the possessors of the elevated land at the immediate front of the extreme left. Basically, he's saying that if they stayed down along Cemetery Ridge, they would be at the mercy of Confederates if they took this high ground out here along the Emmitsburg Road. Now, as they're surveying this ground, it's about 11 o'clock or so, 11:30 now. Hunt hears artillery fire coming from the other end of the battlefield, and he begins to ride off. Before he leaves, though, Sickles asks him again, do you think this is good ground? Perhaps I could occupy this with my men. Hunt says, well, it's good ground, but I can't authorize you to move out there. I am not the commander of the army. But I would, however, recommend that you send a reconnaissance out to explore the ground beyond that position. Basically indicating that they needed to figure out if there were Confederates out on the other side of the Emmitsburg Road, out along Warfield Ridge. This is what Sickles does next. And this is really a fateful event here, and Sickles eventually moving his command out towards this position. Sending out this reconnaissance is the final straw here for Sickles making this decision. He orders several companies of the 1st United States sharpshooters to make a reconnaissance out along that tree line, out along Warfield Ridge, about 300 or so men. These soldiers will report to Sickles that there are Confederates out in those woods beyond the Emmitsburg Road. Now at this point, Dan Sickles is entirely unaware of General Robert E. Lee's battle plan that day. He doesn't know exactly what Lee is trying to do, but he is concerned again about this high ground based on his experience from Chancellorsville. He's concerned about it once he has heard that there are Confederates out along those trees, out along Warfield Ridge. So now all of these things combine, and Sickles decides he's going to move his command forward. After hours and hours worth of confusion, hours and hours worth of asking where his command is supposed to be located, Sickles now finally decides to move his command outwards. And this happens about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 155 years ago at this moment. The 3rd Army Corps consisted of 2 divisions. Now the initial position that they take is not the one that they're going to hold eventually when the fighting begins out here later that day. Sickles is concerned not only with this high ground, but also with trying to protect his flank as well. So he moves 2 brigades from General Andrew Humphrey's division, the brigades of Joseph Carr and William Brewster, out a few hundred yards from Cemetery Ridge, not out towards the Emmitsburg Road, but a few hundred yards behind it, basically in some middle ground, in a low swale here, just beyond where these cars are parked, out along Sickles Avenue. That becomes the right flank of the new 3rd Corps line. The other brigade from Humphrey's division, George Brayling's brigade, they're held back in a reserve role for the moment. Now just moving those soldiers out isn't enough. So Sickles orders General Birney, his other division commander, to turn his orientation towards the south, now facing in this direction. And this will give you a sense here on how far and wide the 3rd Corps is going to be spread, folks. Again, looking down towards Little Round Top, you can see Big Round Top off to the right. Just on our side of the Round Tops is where Devil's Den is located. Birney's division is stretching all the way down towards Devil's Den, with Ward's brigade, de Trobriand's brigade, Graham's brigade, trying to hold this massive stretch of ground. Very difficult ground as well. So you have a 3rd Corps position that is stretching essentially from the Klingel farm, the red barn you can see over here, all the way down towards the Round Tops. Now, if Sickles was concerned over being able to hold the ground he was occupying before, one would think now he should be really concerned because of how spread out his command is on this ground here. But by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Sickles has moved his command forward. By 3 o'clock now, again, we're going through the timeline of events that day. By 3 o'clock, at George Meade's headquarters, he is holding a council of war just south of Cemetery Hill. And every Corps commander's there, except for one, the man of the hour here, Dan Sickles. Sickles isn't there. At this point, Meade is really getting fed up with him. All day long, he's been answering these inquiries about where his Corps is supposed to go. They don't get along to begin with. They don't like each other. They don't respect each other. And now, Sickles isn't at this council of war. So Meade has to send out a second order telling Sickles to come over to his headquarters for this council of war. At this moment, one of the aides from Gouverneur Warren's staff, Chief Engineer of the Army of the Potomac, he arrives at Meade's headquarters and notes that there's something weird going on with where Dan Sickles' men are located. Meade's heard enough. He mounts up his horse and begins riding out towards this direction, finding Dan Sickles along the way, who is finally headed towards Meade's headquarters. Meade will ride out and discover what Sickles has done, and discern this decision that Sickles has made. And he is none too pleased about it. Captain Payne on Meade's staff said this: "I never saw General Meade so angry, if I may so call it. He ordered General Sickles to retire his line to the position he had been instructed to take. This was done in a few sharp words." Meade told Sickles, "General Sickles, this is not neutral ground. Our guns command it as well as the enemy's. the very reason you cannot hold it applies to them as well. Basically reminding him that where we are standing at the peach orchard is in no man's land. It is in the middle of Warfield Ridge and Cemetery Ridge, both of which have plenty of artillery for their respective sides. So whoever occupies this is going to be sitting in the middle of two respective artillery fights. Sickles offers to move his men back, but at that point, it's too late. Because by that point, the Confederate presence over along Warfield Ridge is becoming undeniable. At that point, it has become very, very evident that fighting will begin here before long. By that point, several divisions of Confederate infantry were deploying along Warfield Ridge. John Bell Hood, Lafayette McLaws, thousands and thousands of Confederate soldiers establishing a position, preparing to attack the Union lines. At this point, Meade's next best option, rather than having Sickles move back, is beginning to try to reinforce the lines out here and reinforce this new altered position for the 3rd Army Corps, which again stretches from down by the Round Tops out here towards the peach orchard and up to our north here. Now all of this, it's kind of tough to follow because it's not battle action. We don't have linear movements here to follow. We're trying to follow a decision as it's made throughout the day. A fateful decision. But it's worth noting that all of this is going to set up the subsequent hours of action here on the southern end of the battlefield. What I'd like to do is just to take a short walk down here towards this monument, and we'll wrap up our program there. That'll hopefully get us a chance to move a little bit, maybe a little bit of wind will pick up, but we're going to move right down towards the Excelsior Brigade monument. Have a little bit of cloud cover at the moment, which is nice. So what we're really trying to do here, folks, is follow the decision making that went for the 3rd Corps advance out here. And we laid out the different steps up at the peach orchard where we had a nice panoramic view of the places we were discussing. But what I really want to emphasize here as we start to wrap up our program here today is that Dan Sickles, as a man, as I noted up front, is a rather controversial and colorful figure here in the history of the Battle of Gettysburg, but we tend to make him a caricature. We tend to make his name just a punchline. This is something that historians do with a lot of different figures in history. We tend to reduce them to one or two little things about them that we can use to maybe get an easy laugh or something. But really, when we think about Dan Sickles, he lived a very, very long, very complex life. This is a guy who lived into his 90s. Later in life, he was pivotal in the establishment of Gettysburg National Military Park as a member of Congress. But these actions here on the afternoon of July 2nd just hang over the rest of Sickles' life and the rest of his legacy more than any other. Really, what we have here at the end of the day is this is a story of decisions and consequences. In the course of a battle, there are thousands of decisions being made at any given moment. Whether it is a decision from a commanding general, whether it is a decision from a private in the ranks, a decision perhaps just to take the next step forward, that is a decision with profound consequences. On July 2nd, few decisions had as profound of consequences for the outcome of Gettysburg as this one that Sickles made, moving his command out here. So let's just recap what we've talked about up at the peach orchard. Why does he make it? Well, to start, he had genuine doubt over where exactly his men were supposed to be located along Cemetery Ridge. He had genuine doubt that morning because he didn't know where Geary's division had been located. Another reason he made this decision, this is higher ground out here. Not major higher ground, but about 60 feet higher. And that experience from Chancellorsville is still fresh in Sickles' mind. He does not want his command to get pelted with artillery like what happened at Chancellorsville with Hazel Grove. The Emmitsburg Road, this road just beyond the peach orchard, this was the major route of advance for the 1st, 11th, and 3rd Corps on July 1st, just the day before, as they arrived in Gettysburg. Sickles also did not believe that George Meade had the best judgment on this matter. He did not believe that George Meade was properly concerned with events taking place here on the left of the Union line. And on that we might say he has some justification. It seems Meade is very much focused on the right end of the Union line on the morning of July 2nd, even considering, didn't ultimately go with it, even considering launching an offensive from the Union line over there. Now the drawbacks for this position, this decision that he made, well, is this the exact spot that George Meade ordered Dan Sickles to be? No, it's not. That would seem to be first on the list of the drawbacks. Sickles had good reason to think that Meade didn't authorize this. Henry Hunt indicated as much when he rode out here and surveyed the ground with Dan Sickles in the late morning hours of July 2nd. Ultimately, this was a decision that would fuel the battle, the fighting here on the southern end of the Gettysburg battlefield on July 2nd. Because Sickles pushed his command out here, he is putting his men squarely in the path of where Robert E. Lee was intending for his attack to occur. Confederates were being sent south beyond Seminary and Warfield Ridge to form up and attack up along the Emmitsburg Road. Sickles' position out here prevents them from carrying out that plan as they intended, but it also means that there is now going to be brutal and prolonged fighting at places like Devil's Den, the peach orchard here, and especially the wheat field just beyond that tree line. Ultimately, these became blood-soaked fields because of this decision. Ultimately, there were thousands and thousands of soldiers in the Union 2nd Corps and the Union 5th Corps who were thrown into the path of the oncoming Confederate onslaught, trying to plug gaps in the line of the Union 3rd Corps because of this decision that Dan Sickles made. This was a decision with profound consequences for thousands of soldiers under his command, thousands of Union soldiers under other commands, and also a decision with profound consequences for Sickles himself. As it was, during the fighting later that day, as Sickles was positioned near the Trosso farm, he lost his leg due to an artillery shell. He was carried off the field on a stretcher, with his leg dangling by a few tendons, coolly smoking a cigar. It was a decision with profound consequences wherever you look. Consequences for privates in the ranks, consequences for Sickles himself. And ultimately, it changed the course of the Battle of Gettysburg. Just to give you a few numbers here, the Union 3rd Corps, of about 11,000 men engaged, lost 4,200 due to casualties that day. John Caldwell's division of the 2nd Corps, which was sent down towards the wheat field to help plug and hold the left flank of Sickles' line, lost over 1,200 casualties. The 5th Corps lost over 2,000 casualties, many of which came, again, around the wheat field. It was a decision of profound consequences. Now, many of Sickles' veterans, the veterans from his command, didn't assign him blame for what happened out here. Private John Haley of the 17th Maine. This isn't strong enough to compete with a motorcycle. Private John Haley of the 17th Maine termed Sickles, quote, one of the bravest and best fighters of the war. And he said this: and although it has been claimed by many that Sickles' line was exceedingly faulty on that day, which no one denies, still, in my judgment, it was providential, if there was anything of this nature, for he held the rebels in check and he exhausted them. I believe that if Birney's division, referring to the left side of Sickles' line, had been formed originally as Meade said he intended on the general line, a ridge running to the Round Top, Cemetery Ridge, the rebels would have gone through it like an eggshell, and the troops which relieved us might not have been in position to fill the gap. Now, historians have, of course, weighed in on this decision for decades and decades, for 155 years. Historian Harry Fawns said this: General Sickles increased the odds of Confederate success when he advanced his 3rd Corps from its important and relatively secure position along Cemetery Ridge. Historian William Glenn Robertson: the poor relationship between Sickles and Meade doomed them on July 2nd, ensuring that neither trusted the other, and it made possible the conditions in which Sickles unilaterally moved his command forward. No matter where you look, there is controversy in this decision. But what is clear is that Sickles' decision dramatically impacts the remainder of the fighting here at Gettysburg, and it dramatically impacted how we still talk about this battle to this very day. What I would leave you with as we wrap up here is we must remember that this decision wasn't made just on a whim. This decision wasn't made because Sickles thought it would be kind of funny for us 155 years later. He had reasons to make this decision. He also had reasons not to make this decision. But that is why those are the things that we continue to debate to this very day. I think that's that debate that brings so many of us out here to the battlefield, even when it's scorching, scalding hot here. So on that, I am going to wrap up a little bit short here today. Again, make sure everybody drink plenty of water this afternoon. It's only going to get hotter as we go. If you have questions, I'd be happy to stick around and chat. I do want to say that it is very heartwarming to see, even on a very brutal day weather-wise, to see so many people that still care enough about the history of this place to still come out and spend some time with us on our ranger program. So we here at the National Park Service thank each and every one of you for being a part of the 155th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. Thanks for joining us.